David Washington had always believed in starting small and dreaming big. 25 years ago, he was just another young man with big hopes and empty pockets. He worked double shifts at a warehouse during the week and spent his weekends fixing old electronics in his garage. His neighbors would bring him their broken TVs, radios, and later on, their computers and phones. Word spread quickly about the guy who could fix anything electronic for a fair price. Back then, David lived in a tiny apartment with his wife Jennifer and their 2 young kids. Money was tight, but David had a vision. Every dollar he earned from his repair work went into a jar on the kitchen counter. Jennifer would joke that the jar was their retirement fund, but David was serious about it. He was saving for something bigger. The breakthrough came when David's old boss at the warehouse decided to retire. The man had been running a small electronics store on the side, but it wasn't doing well. He offered to sell it to David for a price that seemed impossible at the time. David emptied their savings account, borrowed money from 3 different relatives, and even took out a loan against Jennifer's car. The family ate rice and beans for months, but David got his first store. Those early days were brutal. David would open the store at 7 in the morning and close it at 10 at night. He did everything himself: sales, repairs, inventory, cleaning, bookkeeping. Jennifer would bring him lunch and help out whenever she could, bringing the kids along since they couldn't afford a babysitter. The children grew up playing between the aisles of electronics, learning to count by organizing inventory and practicing their reading with product manuals. The first year was the hardest. There were weeks when David wasn't sure if he could pay the rent. He competed against big chain stores that could sell products for less than he could buy them wholesale. But David had something they didn't. He knew every customer by name. When Mrs. Chen needed a new TV but was worried about the cost, David set up a payment plan. When young Tony broke his gaming console, David fixed it for free because he knew the kid's family was struggling. Slowly, things started to turn around. David's reputation for honest service and fair prices spread throughout the neighborhood. People would drive past 3 other electronics stores just to shop at his place. He started carrying brands that the big stores didn't have. He learned about new technology faster than anyone else in town. When flat-screen TVs were still new and expensive, David was the first local store to figure out how to get them at good prices. By year 5, David was doing well enough to hire his first employee. Linda was a retired teacher who loved helping people understand how their new gadgets worked. She became like a grandmother to David's customers, explaining technology in simple terms and making everyone feel comfortable. With Linda handling sales, David could focus on growing the business. The second store opened 3 years later in the next town over. David applied the same formula: excellent service, fair prices, and treating customers like family. This time, he hired Carlos, a young man who reminded David of himself at that age. Carlos was eager to learn and had a natural talent for understanding customer needs. As the years passed, David's business grew steadily. He wasn't trying to become the biggest electronics retailer in the state. He just wanted to provide good jobs for good people and serve his community well. Each new store was carefully chosen, always in neighborhoods where David felt he could make a real difference. By the time David reached his 15th year in business, he owned 8 stores across 3 counties. Each location had its own personality, but they all shared the same values David had established from day one. His employees were loyal because he treated them well. Good wages, health insurance, and opportunities to grow within the company. Many of his managers had started as part-time sales associates. David's approach to management was hands-off but involved. He trusted his store managers to run their locations, but he also made surprise visits to each store every few weeks. These weren't inspections or checks to catch people doing something wrong. David genuinely wanted to see how things were going, talk to customers, and help solve any problems that came up. He had a habit of dressing casually during these visits. David never forgot where he came from, and he felt more comfortable in jeans and a simple shirt than in expensive suits. His employees appreciated this about him. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or show off his success. He was still the same guy who started out fixing electronics in his garage. Jennifer often teased him about his casual style. She would say that people probably had no idea they were talking to the owner of a successful business chain. David liked it that way. He felt he could get a more honest picture of how his stores were really operating when people treated him like a regular customer instead of the boss. The business had grown beyond what David had ever imagined possible. His children, now adults, had both joined the company. His daughter managed the accounting and finance side, while his son oversaw purchasing and supplier relationships. David was proud that he had built something that could support his family and provide good jobs for dozens of other families in the community. Despite his success, David never lost his connection to the day-to-day operations of his stores. He still knew most of his long-term customers by name. He still remembered birthdays and anniversaries. When regular customers were going through tough times, David would quietly arrange discounts or extended payment plans. This personal touch was what set his stores apart from the big chains. As David's business grew, so did his confidence in his team. He had hired good managers who shared his values and understood his vision for customer service. This allowed him to step back from daily operations and focus on strategic planning and growth opportunities. But he never stopped caring about the details that made each customer interaction special. Looking back on his journey, David often marveled at how far he had come. From fixing broken radios in his garage to owning a successful chain of electronics stores, the path had been longer and harder than he ever expected. But every challenge had taught him something valuable, and every success had been shared with the people who helped make it possible. Now, as he prepared for another routine visit to one of his stores, David had no idea that this particular day would test everything he had built and believed in. The casual clothes he wore and the unassuming way he carried himself would soon become the center of a situation that would change his perspective on his own business forever. Saturday afternoons at the downtown store were always busy. Families came in looking for new TVs, teenagers browsed the latest phones, and elderly customers sought help with their computers. David had chosen this particular Saturday to visit because he wanted to see how the store handled its busiest time of the week. He parked his modest Honda Civic in the customer parking lot just like any regular shopper would. David wore his usual weekend outfit, comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie. He had learned years ago that dressing casually during these visits gave him the most honest view of how his stores really operated. As David walked through the front doors, he immediately noticed the energy in the store. Customers moved through the aisles, sales associates helped with questions, and the sound of demonstration TVs created a busy buzz throughout the space. Everything seemed normal at first glance. David started his usual routine, slowly walking through each section and observing the customer experience. He watched how employees interacted with shoppers, noticed which displays were working well, and mentally noted areas that might need improvement. This wasn't about catching people doing something wrong. David genuinely wanted to understand how to make the shopping experience better for everyone. In the smartphone section, he overheard a sales associate explaining the differences between various models to an elderly woman. The employee was patient and kind, taking time to show her how each phone worked. David smiled, remembering how he had trained his staff to treat every customer with respect, regardless of how much they planned to spend. Moving to the computer area, David noticed that several display models weren't working properly. He pulled out his phone and made a note to have the tech team fix them. As he typed, he also took a few photos of the displays to show exactly what needed attention. That's when things went wrong. Robert Chen, the store manager, had been watching David for several minutes. To Robert, this casually dressed man taking photos and notes looked suspicious. In Robert's mind, someone planning to steal or case the store for a robbery might behave exactly this way. Robert had been managing this location for 8 months. He was ambitious and eager to prove himself, but he had never actually met David in person. All of their communication had been through email and phone calls. Like many of the newer employees, Robert only knew David as a name on corporate documents. "Excuse me," Robert said, approaching David with a stern voice. "What are you doing with those photos?" David looked up, surprised by the aggressive tone. "Oh, I'm just making some notes about the displays. A few of them seem to be malfunctioning." Robert's suspicion deepened. Why would a regular customer care About broken displays, and why was this man acting like he had some authority to evaluate store operations? "Sir, I'm going to need you to delete those photos and put your phone away," Robert demanded. "Taking pictures of our merchandise and store layout isn't allowed." David was confused. There was no store policy against customers taking photos, and even if there was, it wouldn't apply to him. He tried to explain calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm actually—" "No misunderstanding at all," Robert interrupted. "You've been walking around this store for 20 minutes taking pictures and acting suspicious. I don't know what you're planning, but it's not happening in my store." Other customers started to notice the confrontation. A family shopping for a new tablet stopped to watch. An elderly man buying batteries turned around to see what was happening. David felt embarrassed and tried to keep his voice low. "Look, if you'll just let me explain who I am." "I don't care who you think you are," Robert cut him off again. "What I see is someone who doesn't belong here, acting in a way that makes my customers and my staff uncomfortable." The accusation hit David like a punch to the stomach. He realized that Robert wasn't just questioning his behavior, he was questioning David's right to be in the store at all. The implication was clear and painful. David tried one more time to resolve the situation peacefully. "My name is David Washington. I own this store. I can show you my identification if you'd like." Robert actually laughed at this. "Right. And I'm the president of the company. Sir, I'm done playing games with you. You need to leave this store right now, or I'm calling security." The confrontation was getting louder, and more customers were stopping to stare. David felt humiliated but tried to maintain his dignity. He reached for his wallet to show his business cards and identification. "Don't reach for anything," Robert said sharply. "Keep your hands where I can see them and walk toward the exit." This was too much. David had built this business from nothing, had employed dozens of people, had served thousands of customers with respect and dignity. Now he was being treated like a criminal in his own store, and it was clear that his race was playing a role in Robert's assumptions. "You're making a serious mistake," David said, his voice shaking with controlled anger. "I'm trying to tell you that I own this business." "The only mistake would be letting you stay here any longer," Robert replied. "Tony," he called to the security guard near the front of the store. "I need you to escort this gentleman out of the building." Tony, a part-time security guard who worked weekends, walked over reluctantly. He could see that the situation was escalating, but he also knew he had to follow the manager's instructions. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," Tony said quietly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. David looked around at the crowd of customers who were now openly staring at the scene. Children pointed while their parents whispered. Teenagers held up their phones, probably recording the encounter. The humiliation was complete. "This is wrong," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is so very wrong. What's wrong is someone thinking they can come into my store and disrespect me and my team," Robert said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here." As Tony gently guided David toward the exit, customers moved aside to create a path. The walk to the front door felt like it took forever. David kept his head up, refusing to show how devastated he felt, but inside his heart was breaking. Just before reaching the door, David turned back to look at Robert one more time. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said quietly. "I know exactly what I've done," Robert replied confidently. "I've protected my store and my customers from someone who didn't belong here." The automatic doors opened, and David found himself standing alone in the parking lot. Customers continued to stream in and out of the store, giving him curious looks. He sat in his car for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. In 25 years of building his business, David had faced many challenges: economic downturns, difficult competitors, problem employees, and demanding customers. But nothing had prepared him for this. To be humiliated and ejected from his own store, in front of his own customers by his own employee, it was almost too much to bear. As David drove home, his mind raced with questions and emotions. How had he failed to create a workplace culture that would prevent this kind of incident? How many of his employees shared Robert's prejudiced assumptions? How many customers had witnessed similar treatment in his stores without him knowing about it? The successful businessman who had entered the store that afternoon was gone. In his place sat a man who suddenly understood that success and ownership meant nothing when faced with the ugly reality of prejudice and discrimination. David barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Robert's face and heard the manager's dismissive voice echoing in his head. By Sunday morning, the humiliation had transformed into something else: determination. David knew he couldn't let this incident pass without understanding exactly what had happened and why. Jennifer found him in his home office early Sunday morning, surrounded by files and laptop computers. She had seen him work through problems before, but never with this kind of intensity. "You've been up all night, haven't you?" she asked, bringing him a cup of coffee. "I need to understand what's really going on in my stores," David replied without looking up from his screen. "Yesterday wasn't just about one bad manager. There's something deeper here that I've been missing." David started with the security footage from Saturday's incident. As the owner, he had access to all surveillance systems across his stores. Watching the encounter unfold from multiple camera angles was even more painful than living through it. But it also revealed details he had missed in the moment. The footage showed that Robert had been watching David almost from the moment he entered the store. Even before David started taking notes and photos, Robert was tracking his movements with obvious suspicion. This wasn't a manager reacting to genuinely suspicious behavior. This was someone who had made assumptions about David based on his appearance the moment he walked through the door. But the security footage revealed something else that made David's stomach turn. As he scrolled through several hours of recordings, he noticed a pattern in how Robert interacted with different customers. White customers received friendly greetings and patient assistance. Black and Hispanic customers were watched more closely and received shorter, less helpful service. David pulled up footage from previous weeks going back several months to when Robert first started managing the store. The pattern became unmistakably clear. Robert consistently treated minority customers with suspicion and provided them with inferior service compared to white customers. The evidence was right there in black and white, or rather, in digital color on David's computer screen. How had he missed this? How had his other employees not reported it? Or had they tried to report it and been ignored? David decided to dig deeper into the store's records. He pulled up customer complaint files for the downtown location, something he usually left to his managers to handle. What he found made him sick to his stomach. Over the past 8 months, there had been 17 formal complaints about poor service or discriminatory treatment at the downtown store. 17. David had never seen a single one of these complaints. Everyone had been filed away by Robert with a brief note claiming the complaints were unfounded, or that the customer was trying to get free merchandise. Reading through the complaints, David saw a clear pattern. Customers described being followed around the store, being questioned about their ability to afford items, and being treated rudely by staff. Several complained specifically about the manager's behavior. One customer wrote that she felt unwelcome and judged from the moment she entered the store. David compared these complaint numbers to his other stores. His best-performing location had received only 3 complaints in the same time period, and all 3 had been resolved to the customer's satisfaction with follow-up calls and service improvements. The financial impact was becoming clear too. Sales at the downtown store had declined 15% since Robert took over as manager. David had assumed this was due to increased competition from online retailers, but now he wondered how much of the decline was due to customers taking their business elsewhere after being treated poorly. David pulled up employment records next. What he found there was equally disturbing. Since Robert became manager, the store had hired 12 new employees. 11 of them were white. Only one was a minority, a Hispanic woman who had quit after just 3 weeks, citing personality conflicts with management in her exit interview. This was particularly shocking because the downtown area was very diverse. The customer base was roughly 40% minority, but the staff Robert had hired didn't reflect that diversity at all. David looked at hiring records from before Robert's time and saw a much more balanced pattern of employment. Even more troubling, David discovered that Robert had rejected several highly qualified minority candidates for positions that remained unfilled for weeks afterward. The reasons given were vague, not a good fit for company culture or lacking necessary experience. But when David looked at their resumes, these candidates often had better qualifications than the people who were eventually hired. David realized he needed to talk to his employees directly. He started with Linda, who had transferred to another store but had worked downtown for 3 years before Robert arrived. "I was wondering when you'd ask about this," Linda said when David called her Sunday evening. "I tried to bring up my concerns about Robert's hiring practices several months ago, but he said personnel decisions were his responsibility and not mine to question." "Why didn't you come to me directly?" David asked. "I thought about it," Linda admitted. "But Robert made it clear that anyone who went over his head would be looking for a new job. And honestly, David, I needed this job. I couldn't risk losing it over what might have looked like personal conflicts with my manager." Linda's words hit David hard. He had always prided himself on having an open-door policy with his employees, but somehow that message wasn't getting through. His workers felt they couldn't come to him with serious problems because they feared retaliation from their managers. David spent Monday morning calling other employees who had worked at the downtown store. The picture that emerged was deeply troubling. Multiple employees had witnessed Robert's discriminatory behavior but felt powerless to do anything about it. Some had tried to provide better service to minority customers to compensate for Robert's attitude, but they were limited in what they could do without directly contradicting their manager. One young sales associate, Kevin, had actually quit rather than continue working under Robert's management. "I couldn't stand watching how he treated people," Kevin told David. "It was embarrassing to work there. I found another job because I didn't want to be associated with that kind of behavior." David realized that Robert's actions weren't just hurting customers. They were driving away good employees and damaging the reputation of the entire business. Word spreads quickly in retail communities, and Robert's behavior was probably known throughout the industry by now. The investigation revealed one more disturbing fact. Robert had been falsifying some of his reports to corporate headquarters. He had claimed that customer complaints were decreasing and that employee satisfaction was high. The reality was exactly the opposite, but Robert had been covering up the problems to make his management performance look better than it actually was. By Tuesday afternoon, David had compiled a comprehensive file documenting Robert's pattern of discrimination, poor customer service, and dishonest reporting. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but David also realized that this situation was partly his own fault. He had been so focused on the big picture of growing his business that he had lost touch with the day-to-day experiences of his customers and employees. He had trusted his managers to uphold the values he thought he had instilled in the company, but he hadn't created adequate systems to ensure those values were actually being practiced. David also discovered that his company's policies around discrimination and customer service weren't as clear as they should have been. While he had always operated with the understanding that all customers should be treated with respect regardless of race, he had never put formal anti-discrimination policies in writing or provided specific training to his managers about recognizing and preventing discriminatory behavior. The investigation had revealed a cancer growing in his business, not just Robert's individual prejudices, but systemic weaknesses that had allowed those prejudices to flourish unchecked. David knew that simply firing Robert wouldn't be enough. He needed to make fundamental changes to ensure this never happened again. But first, he needed to confront Robert and address the immediate problem. David spent Tuesday evening planning exactly how he would handle that confrontation. This wasn't just about getting revenge for his personal humiliation. It was about protecting his customers, his employees, and the values that his business was supposed to represent. As David prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of his business career, he felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and determination. The investigation had shown him uncomfortable truths about his own company, but it had also given him the tools he needed to fix the problems and ensure they never happened again. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching David's mood, as he prepared for what would be one of the most important confrontations of his business career. He had spent the previous evening going over his plan with Jennifer and his attorney, making sure every detail was perfect. David chose his outfit carefully this time. Instead of his usual casual clothes, he wore a sharp navy business suit, crisp, white shirt, and his best tie. He wanted there to be absolutely no question about his authority and position when he walked into that store. At 9 o'clock sharp, David's legal advisor, Patricia Rodriguez, arrived at his office. Patricia had been handling legal matters for David's business for over 10 years. She was known for her calm demeanor and thorough preparation, qualities that David appreciated greatly right now. "Are you ready for this?" Patricia asked as they reviewed the documentation one final time. "I've been ready since Saturday," David replied, though his stomach was churning with nervous energy. They drove to the downtown store in Patricia's car, arriving just as the morning rush was beginning. David could see Robert through the windows, talking to an employee near the customer service counter. The manager looked confident and comfortable, having no idea that his world was about to change dramatically. David and Patricia entered the store together. Several employees recognized David immediately, their faces showing surprise and confusion at seeing the owner in formal business attire, accompanied by someone who was obviously an attorney. Robert was helping a customer when he noticed David approaching. For a moment, his face showed recognition, then confusion, then growing alarm as he realized who he was looking at. The customer he was helping sensed the tension and quietly moved away. "Good morning, Robert," David said in a calm, professional voice. "I believe we need to have a conversation." Robert's face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "We've met," David replied simply. "Saturday afternoon, right here in this store. Though, I don't think you were properly introduced to me at the time." The realization hit Robert like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. You're the owner?" "I am indeed," David confirmed. "And this is Patricia Rodriguez, my legal counsel. I think we should step into your office for a private discussion." Robert's hands were shaking as he led them to the small manager's office in the back of the store. Other employees watched with obvious curiosity and concern. Word was already spreading through the store that something significant was happening. Once they were seated in the cramped office, Patricia opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder of documents. The sight of all that paperwork made Robert even more nervous. "Before we begin," David said, "I want you to understand that everything we discuss today is being recorded, and Ms. Rodriguez is here as a witness to ensure that everything is handled properly and legally." Robert nodded mutely, clearly too shocked to speak. David pulled out copies of the security footage screenshots, customer complaint records, and employment statistics that he had compiled during his investigation. He laid them out on the desk systematically, watching Robert's face grow more ashen with each piece of evidence. "I'd like you to explain these patterns to me, Robert," David said, pointing to the discrimination statistics. "Help me understand why customer complaints at this store have increased by 400% since you became manager." Robert stared at the documents, his mind racing to find excuses or explanations. "Those complaints were mostly frivolous," he finally stammered. "People trying to get free stuff or causing trouble?" "All 17 of them?" David asked quietly. "Including the grandmother who complained that you followed her around the store because you didn't think she could afford a television? Or the college student who said you questioned whether his credit card was really his?" Each example hit Robert like another hammer blow. He had no idea that David had investigated so thoroughly. Patricia spoke for the first time. "Mr. Chen, we have security footage documenting clear patterns of discriminatory behavior. We have customer complaints that were never properly investigated. We have employment records showing systematic bias in your hiring practices. Do you have any explanation for these patterns?" Robert tried to rally some defense. "I was just trying to protect the store from theft and fraud. That's part of my job as manager." "By assuming that customers of certain races were more likely to steal or commit fraud?" David asked. "Because that's what the evidence shows, Robert. You treated white customers with respect and courtesy while subjecting minority customers to suspicion and inferior service." The evidence was overwhelming, and Robert knew it. His shoulders slumped as the reality of his situation became clear. David leaned forward. Do you remember what you said to me on Saturday? You said I didn't belong in your store. You said you were protecting your customers from someone who didn't belong there. I didn't know who you were, Robert said weakly. That's exactly the point, David replied, his voice rising slightly. You didn't know who I was, but you made assumptions based on how I looked and how I was dressed. You decided I didn't belong in a store that I built from nothing, that I've poured 25 years of my life into building. Patricia placed a termination letter on the desk. Mr. Chen, your employment with Washington Electronics is terminated immediately. Effective today, you have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and turn in all company property. Robert stared at the letter as if it might change if he looked at it long enough. This isn't fair, he said finally. I was just doing my job. Your job was to provide excellent customer service to everyone who entered this store, David said firmly. Your job was to create a welcoming environment where all customers felt valued and respected. Your job was to uphold the values that this company was built on. You failed completely at those responsibilities. David stood up, indicating that the meeting was over. Ms. Rodriguez will supervise the collection of your belongings and the return of company property. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your home address. As they prepared to leave the office, Robert made one last desperate attempt. Please, I need this job. I have a family to support. Can't we work something out? David paused at the door. I thought about that, Robert, but then I remembered the families you hurt with your behavior, the customers who felt unwelcome in their own community, the employees who were afraid to speak up because you created a culture of fear and discrimination. Those people matter too. Patricia remained in the office to handle the termination procedures while David walked back onto the sales floor. By now, all the employees had gathered near the front of the store, clearly anxious about what was happening. David called them together in the center of the store. I know you're all wondering what's going on, so I want to explain the situation clearly. He told them about Saturday's incident, about his investigation, and about Robert's termination. Some employees looked shocked. Others nodded as if they had been expecting this moment for months. I owe all of you an apology, David continued. I created a system where someone like Robert could discriminate against customers and employees without consequences. That's my failure as a leader, and I take full responsibility for it. Linda, who had transferred from this store partly to get away from Robert's management style, raised her hand. What happens to the store now? Great question, David replied. I'm promoting Carmen Valdez to store manager immediately. Carmen had been the assistant manager and was well respected by both customers and employees. She'll be implementing new policies and procedures to ensure that what happened here never happens again at any of our locations. David spent the next hour talking with individual employees, listening to their experiences under Robert's management, and explaining the changes that would be coming. Many shared stories of incidents they had witnessed but felt powerless to address. By the time David was ready to leave, word of Robert's firing had spread throughout the store, and even to some regular customers. Several people approached David to thank him for taking action. One elderly customer, Mrs. Patterson, who had been shopping at David's stores for over 15 years, pulled him aside. I was here on Saturday, she said quietly. I saw what that manager did to you. It was wrong, and I'm glad you did something about it. Thank you, David replied. I hope you'll continue to feel welcome in our store. Oh, I will, she said with a smile. This is my store. It has been for years, and now I know it's in good hands again. As David drove home that afternoon, he felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The confrontation was over, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. Firing Robert was just the first step in rebuilding the culture and values that he thought he had established but had clearly failed to protect. The incident had been painful and humiliating, but it had also been educational. David now understood that good intentions weren't enough. He needed systems, policies, and regular oversight to ensure that his values were actually practiced throughout his organization. Justice had been served, but more importantly, David now had the opportunity to build something better, a business that truly lived up to the ideals he had always claimed to represent. The weeks following Robert's dismissal became a turning point not just for the downtown store, but for David's entire business philosophy. He realized that firing one discriminatory manager was only the beginning of the changes needed to prevent such incidents from happening again. Carmen Valdez stepped into her new role as store manager with enthusiasm and determination. She had witnessed Robert's behavior firsthand and was eager to create a more welcoming environment for everyone. Her first week was spent rebuilding relationships with customers who had been treated poorly and reassuring employees that the culture of fear was over. David worked closely with Carmen to implement immediate changes. They started by reaching out to every customer who had filed a complaint during Robert's tenure. David personally called each one to apologize for their experience and invite them back to the store. Many were surprised to receive a call from the owner himself, and most agreed to give the store another chance. Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who had complained about being followed around the store, was initially skeptical when David called her. "I've been shopping in this neighborhood for 30 years, she told him. "I never felt so unwelcome anywhere as I did in your store that day." "That's exactly why I'm calling," David replied. "What happened to you was completely unacceptable, and I want to make sure it never happens to anyone else. Would you be willing to visit the store again so I can show you the changes we're making?" When Mrs. Johnson returned the following week, Carmen personally greeted her and gave her a tour of the store. The difference in atmosphere was immediately apparent. Employees smiled genuinely and offered help without being pushy or suspicious. Mrs. Johnson ended up purchasing a new tablet and told her friends about the positive experience. David knew that individual outreach wasn't enough. He needed to create systematic changes that would prevent discrimination throughout his entire business. He hired a diversity and inclusion consultant to help develop comprehensive policies and training programs. The consultant, Dr. Williams, spent 2 weeks visiting all of David's stores and interviewing employees at every level. Her report was eye-opening. While the downtown store under Robert's management had been the worst example, subtle forms of bias existed throughout the organization. "The good news," Dr. Williams told David, "is that your employees generally share your values of treating all customers with respect. The problem is that you've never given them the tools and training to recognize and address discriminatory behavior when they see it." Together, they developed a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. Every employee, from part-time sales associates to senior managers, would attend mandatory training sessions on recognizing unconscious bias, providing excellent customer service to all demographics, and creating inclusive workplace environments. The training sessions were more impactful than David had expected. Many employees shared their own experiences with discrimination and talked about times when they had witnessed unfair treatment but weren't sure how to respond. The sessions gave them concrete tools for addressing problems and clear channels for reporting concerns. David also established a new policy requiring that all customer complaints be forwarded directly to corporate headquarters within 24 hours. No manager could simply file away complaints or dismiss them without investigation. Each complaint would be reviewed by David's team and followed up with the customer to ensure satisfaction. The hiring process was completely overhauled as well. All managers received training on fair hiring practices, and every hiring decision for management positions now required approval from corporate headquarters. David wanted to ensure that the company's leadership reflected the diversity of the communities they served. Carmen proved to be an exceptional leader. Under her management, the downtown store's atmosphere transformed completely. Sales began to recover within the first month, and customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically. But the most telling change was in the employees themselves. Kevin, the young man who had quit rather than work under Robert, asked to be rehired. "I heard from friends that things were different now," he told Carmen during his interview. "This was a good job before, and I'd like to come back if you'll have me." David made another significant change by implementing regular listening sessions in all his stores. Once a month, he or one of his senior managers would visit each location to meet directly with employees and hear their concerns. These sessions were confidential and employees were encouraged to speak honestly about any problems they observed. The impact of these changes extended beyond customer service. Employee retention improved significantly across all locations. Word spread in the retail community that David's stores were good places to work, and the quality of job applicants increased noticeably. 3 months after Robert's firing, something unexpected happened. David received a call from a local television reporter who had heard about the incident and the subsequent changes. "We'd like to do a story about what happened and how you've addressed it," the reporter explained. "It seems like a positive example of how businesses can learn from mistakes and make real improvements." David was initially reluctant to publicize the incident. The memory of being humiliated in his own store was still painful, but after discussing it with Jennifer and his team, he decided that sharing his story might help other business owners recognize and address similar problems in their own organizations. The television story aired on a Friday evening and was picked up by several other media outlets over the weekend. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Customers called and emailed to share their own experiences with discrimination in retail settings and to praise David for taking concrete action to address the problem. More importantly, other business owners reached out to ask for advice on implementing similar diversity and inclusion programs. David found himself becoming an unexpected advocate for fair treatment in retail environments. The downtown store became a model for the entire chain. Sales there increased 25% over the previous year, making it one of the top-performing locations. Customer reviews consistently praised the welcoming atmosphere and excellent service. 1 year after the incident, David reflected on how much had changed. What had started as one of the most humiliating experiences of his life had become a catalyst for positive transformation throughout his business. Dr. Williams conducted a follow-up assessment and found significant improvements across all metrics. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped to nearly zero. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements. And most importantly, the stores had become truly welcoming spaces for customers of all backgrounds. David also discovered that creating an inclusive environment was good for business in ways he hadn't expected. The stores began attracting customers from a wider geographic area as word spread about their reputation for excellent service. Several large corporate clients chose to work with David's company specifically because of their demonstrated commitment to diversity and inclusion. Carmen was promoted to regional manager, overseeing 3 stores, and she implemented the same inclusive practices at each location. She became a mentor to other managers throughout the company, helping them create welcoming environments for both customers and employees. The incident had taught David a crucial lesson about leadership. It wasn't enough to have good intentions or to assume that his values would automatically be shared and practiced throughout his organization. Real leadership required constant attention, clear policies, regular training, and systems for accountability. David also learned the importance of listening to his employees and customers. The warning signs of Robert's discriminatory behavior had been there for months, but David's systems hadn't captured them effectively. The new feedback mechanisms ensured that problems would be identified and addressed quickly. As David looked back on that painful Saturday afternoon, he realized that while he wouldn't wish such an experience on anyone, it had ultimately made him a better leader and his company a better organization. The humiliation had been temporary, but the positive changes it sparked would benefit customers and employees for years to come. The story of David's experience spread throughout the business community, inspiring other companies to examine their own practices and make improvements where needed. What had started as one man's fight against discrimination had become a broader movement toward creating more inclusive retail environments. Most importantly, David had kept his promise to ensure that no customer would ever again feel unwelcome in one of his stores. The young man who had started with nothing but a dream and a jar of quarters had built something bigger than a successful business. He had created an organization that truly lived up to its values.